forward to this. Cool. So next week, and actually, from what I understand, this Wednesday and next Monday, we do not have class. Is everybody on the same page with that? Cool. Now, I'm still a little bit dubious. Do we have class on Wednesday next week?
But
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
I think yeah, I think they have the classes we're supposed to have on Monday. We will have it on Tuesday.
Cool. And that's my understanding as well. I just wanted to make certain that we were clear as much as possible with that because it's it's clear as mud to me about when I'm supposed to be here. But I will be here for that. I'm actually gonna find that and I'll toss that in a little bit. But yeah, I'm trying to dump as many things that I possibly that comes across into here as possible. So I will get you guys a syllabus. I know I've not done that. I apologize. You do have a textbook now, and it's under course documents. I've tossed the textbook in there. There is there are things in here that we will not cover. I mean, like it's over 1,000 pages at this point. Please do not print that and kill trees. I don't want you to kill trees. Um, some things we'll cover, some things we won't. The reason why I kind of left everything open was some people will use that as a start for finding other information. So that's why I wanted to kind of leave that open for other people because they may use it later. Sound fair?
Yeah, you said you normally use a different textbook. Can you also share that one? Just
Um,
anyone who's
yeah, I can share an older
just
version of that because that's
just fun.
fair. It's a lot more heady. I kind of regret that I didn't know about this textbook beforehand because this one's a little bit easier to grasp right away. So, and I'm going to be using some of the slides from that other textbook for the brain section. I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys about the brain. Brain is one of my favorite things in the world to talk about because we'll talk about the amygdala, about the prefrontal cortex, what happens when something goes wrong with that part of the brain. That's when this class gets to be really, really, really fun because then we can start seeing just when things go wrong with the brain. Totally fun. Cool. So well, yeah, good question. Psychology is a good major if you want to become a neurosurgeon. Absolutely. Because part of the neurosurgery world is understanding how the brain actually works and how we will have different types of behaviors based off of those those changes in the brain. So if you're doing an aspect of surgery on the occiput, you'd be expecting to have changes in a person's vision. Now, you wouldn't immediately think that unless you had more of a study onto that. So the more you go into the psychological perspective, it almost becomes an anatomy and physiology class. Cool. I'm gonna jump. Actually, I'll start before kind of going into the slides and everything like that too. What did you guys find for different types of research methods out there? Anything you liked, disliked? Were you guys able to find any types of studies or things like that too that we do out in this area? Yeah, the naturalistic research is a really, really cool thing to do where we start observing people in their natural environment. Um, we don't get what's called a secondary observer effect, where people are um, they respond based off of the fact that they know they're being watched. Sometimes people will behave a certain way if they know they're being watched compared to the way they behave when no one's watching. So it's also there's things called the Hawthorne effects, that can very much happen. Some of the most interesting Hawthorne effects that have been done were there were they were looking at productivity inside a factory. And one of the things that they were doing where they were manipulating the brilliance or the intensity of the lights. And they would just slightly turn down the light by 10% to see was there a change in productivity. And would you believe that productivity changed when they decreased it? Product productivity changed for the better by decreasing that slightly. It got to about 30 to 40%, and nobody could see anything. Well, decrease in productivity. Then they started doing it backward up with that. Now, the fact of the matter is, we changed the perspective of that because people were not able to see. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the perspective of changing that stimulus of the lights. It was about the fact that globally, um, there were issues. Let's just put it that way. So, yeah. So the philosophers' work and their idea of the mind, that's something that is very interesting. How do we study what the mind is? So neuroscience is something that's a very, very big field in that. We're doing a lot of functional MRIs. So we're having somebody either watch a video or watch like a cute kitten versus I don't know, a bunny being mauled and see what happens with the brain based off of the changes of what they see. Again, we can see a lot about the fact that there is a brain body connection, and there would be in a case like that changes in the physiology more than just the brain, but in the body as well. So we're seeing an awful lot more of that. Any other types of studies you guys saw? One and two tail hypotheses. So it sounds like you guys found a lot of quantitative studies. Did anybody see anything about qualitative studies? Cool. I'm going to show you guys a couple qualitative studies. Again, I'm using some of my own research only just because it's readily available and it's a quick way to show this. Um, Here is actually that's not one I wanted. Where are you? Yeah, this is a qualitative study. So I did a study on foreign-born workers that are coming in and they're working on an H-1B visa and how they felt ostracized by the smell of the workplace. What we did was we had a small group of people, and based off of that, we did interviews and we used the information that they gave us, and we were able to then say, based off of this, we're saying this type of theory exists. We now need to do a quantitative study. So that would look like when we start getting later into this, we've got a literature review, data collection. We start actually showing data where we actually start having their comments in here as the actual data. And we explain saying that's part of the theme that we observed. So do you guys see any problems with a study like this? Again, we sampled 35 people and we're saying that it represents foreign-born workers. Ali, what do you got?
It's Allie. Sorry, but
Ali,
y
Ali,
yeah.
Ali, Ali, Ali. Okay.
Yes, great. I think one problem is that, well, there's many different types of people and their views, and just 35 people I don't think is enough to.
To definitively explain that theory, right?
Yeah.
Totally agree. One of the reasons why we do qualitative studies first is because there are no studies out there whatsoever about how you feel ostracized when you come to a new country and there's smells. And that type of thing just doesn't exist. We have to start somewhere. And we get a relatively small sample. 35 is actually a large sample for a qualitative study. But what we did with something like that is we wanted to say, is this something that exists on that? We then, based off of a qualitative study, would then do a quantitative study to say how prevalent is this issue when we get a much, much larger sample. So we start with qualitative studies, and then we start moving to quantitative, where we do experiments, we do surveys, we do other things like that, looking at much more global perspectives. But we always start with qualitative studies. Now, there is a type of qualitative study that is worth mentioning, and that is a case study. Have you guys ever heard of case studies? Did those come across for any of you? So again, we have had a circumstance here too where, and again, just using mine because it's readily available. Yeah, I love it. Ashley, you had a perfect way of saying qualitative studies help formulate hypotheses for quantitative studies. Actually, not hypotheses, they're propositions that occur. So that slightly different term, that's really all that really does. But with a case study, we only did 14 interviews among 12 people. And then we also got some other information about them as well too. It only was of one organization, but we saw enough about this to be able to say, we believe that this could be presented to a larger group. We're currently doing a study in nonprofits about how they're using this ethical framework called ethics of care. It's the next phase that's going on. A case study is much more focused, and it gives specifics about a specific group. So this is a nonprofit that is a faith-based nonprofit. They had an ethical circumstance, and how did they handle it? We specifically only wanted to say the way they handled this is an example of something that could happen. So just a perspective of what's going on. We almost always in psychology, to build theory, we start with qualitative and then we start moving on. And to use that, I had mentioned about where is that? Yeah. So a proposition would look very similar to, I've got those a little bit later in here too. So we have propositions based off of what we sound here too. Frontline workers will use deep acting to navigate innate reactions of their behavioral immune system to accomplish job duties. Basically, we had circumstances where people were coughing during COVID, and they used the perspective of saying, "Oh, service with a smile." Those are a couple things that with that we found that those type of things were present with this. Again, there was not any literature supporting saying the behavioral immune system was being involved, so we had to start with a qualitative study to begin it. Now we're following even further. We then gave data to explain different themes and some examples of that type of thing. Make sense? So how about quantitative studies? Did you guys come across any of those that you thought was interesting?
Think, I had already mentioned mine, where I like talked about the philosophers and like their ideas of psychology and how it's all different. So, yeah, that's my kind of quantitative side of the research.
I could barely hear you.
Sorry, is this better? The other time.
A lot of the studies that you guys are participating in, the survey type of things, are quantitative studies. We have to have a much larger N from a statistics perspective. We have a lot more people. So an example of this is a naturalistic study, but at the same point too, my N for this group was 20,000 comments. So I was testing to say, was COVID actually as bad for working moms? Was what we were basically looking at. And off of that too, we were looking at the perspective of how they responded to different stimuli based off of the comments that they placed on there. So yeah, when we ended up with 13,000 comments was the end of that too. A lot of different things from that. But we tend to use the qualitative to start with, and then we start doing things like experiments or other type of surveys to say, how much does this actually occur in the real world? So the experiments are a perfect example of that, where we need to have a much larger N to say how much does this happen between different ones. Face-to-face interviews tend to be more on the qualitative side because you're gathering very rich amounts of data that then you say, but when looking at saying, I'm seeing certain themes of what's occurring with the things that people are saying. So normally we will see between normally 150 to thousands is what we tend to see in quantitative studies. Does that make sense? A controlled clinical trial would most likely be a quantitative study because what they're doing is they're grabbing a bunch more metrics, and it comes down to literally they're just doing a lot of math. And we have a whole field called psychometrics that help us capture different perspectives of a construct, like how much does a person have psychopathy or type 1 psychopathy versus type 2 psychopathy. We would capture that data and then say, based off of this, that will connect with another construct that we're collecting, like life satisfaction. Well, great. So we have a construct of that that's internally valid and externally valid, and then we mathematically connect the two. That's what we're doing with those type of studies. So psychology becomes a very big math thing later. So if you like math, psychology is a place to be. If you don't like math, you can still do qualitative studies, but you're starting theory. Sound cool? Cool. I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts. Cool. We've already covered a couple things like this too. So I want to start with this wonderful little quote. Experimentation in a laboratory occurs, socially speaking, on an island, quite isolated from the life or society. So think about it. We have laboratories. Some of you guys are choosing to be part of the research pool, and you're going in and you're having them do types of experiments on you. Now, there are things like blood pressure, or they might put like encephalogram on your head or something along those lines. Can we really trust an experiment that occurs in an environment like that? I mean, why can't we? Yeah, why wouldn't we be able to study, to not study, but trust any result that happens specifically in a lab? Yeah, it's very controlled. It can be too controlled. The other problem with it too is we may not be actually sampling the people that really it's affecting. If you think about it, you guys would be considered to be a student sample. So we're sampling a bunch of students that are basically required to be part of this, and they may or may not actually be the demographic we're really looking at. So great. So we have a bunch of able-bodied students that we're looking at their ability to read and focus on something. Can we infer that people with a learning disability would be able to have the same response? Exactly. We wouldn't be able to easily do that. So we have to be very careful on how we experiment, and then we also just say this was only in a student sample. There are some journals that actually I've looked at that I've tried to send to, and they will not accept a student sample, meaning that from a research pool like at Brooklyn College and such, because the fact of the matter is it's not actually really studying the phenomenon that we're really looking at. It's great to start theory, but again, the top journals are starting to say, yeah, we have biased data. Now, with that said, I think it's worth mentioning on this. You guys are required to be part of some aspect of research. Yes, you can do opt out of doing research by reviewing a paper and such. But is it truly ethical for us to require our psychology students to be part of our studies when we have power over you guys and we know this is part of your grade? Can you see problems there? It can be bias. So, elaborate that on what do you guys think? How could things go horribly wrong?
Can oh sorry. Can you
No,
hear
it's
me?
fine. You can go first.
No worries. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Um, well, what I noticed is I already started to take one of the surveys
Mm-hmm.
um, through the psych department for research, and at the end they were like, "We know that this is a requirement, but please be honest, survey seriously." And so I thought that was kind of interesting because they know. I think it's almost like an acknowledgement of the power. They know that this is a requirement, and so they you might not be really fully present for the study. You might be just going through the motions. I don't know. I thought it was like an interesting line at the end.
Yeah. Well, and what's kind of interesting about that too is, and I'm not saying specifically that Brooklyn College does this, but there are many departments that I've been aware of. Many students, one of the reasons why they require participation specifically in the research pool is that they want to get subjects for the research being done by the faculty. So they have to raise the N for those people to be able to get the research done. So again, are they really trying to teach the students or are they trying to accomplish research? I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Sorry, can you elaborate that just a little bit? I'm kind of
Yeah, some schools will require students to be part of the research pools. Now, one of the reasons why they're doing that is not actually to make it to where students will learn the process. They'll say that's the reason, but really the main reason is that they want to get research participation for getting people tenure, getting the research done for their facility, for their organization.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it really depends on the professor. I don't think I think a lot of things aren't black and white. So there's always a asterisk next to everything. So it really all depends on the professor. If the professor, knows that he really is just trying to like fill a quota, that's one thing. But there are professors that do kind of, need to teach. Like we have to learn from somewhere.
Right.
You know, even the best people in the field have been where we are. So they had to learn it from somebody. And I think in some way, even the professors that are doing it to fit a quota, that kind of helps in the way as well. Because now we're like seeing, or I guess experiencing what not to do. if we ever kind of click, like, okay, he probably did this to like for numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that.
Yeah. I don't know, does it piss you guys off in any type of way that you have this research participation requirement for your grade?
No.
Not really.
Okay.
Like we have to learn it from somewhere.
Right.
If it's not with, the professor, it is, well, that's really it. It's with the professor. It's the only option. Well, it helps that it's the only option we have, if that makes sense. Or
Yeah.
what I have. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but it helps that it's the only option I have is to learn from a professor who probably has gone through this also.
We tend to deal with extremes when we look at where things go wrong. So my perspective on this is if I were going to require you guys to do in-person research with the school, first off, now this is an online class and I can't assume that you're on campus. That's part of this. But I'm going to deal with the perspective of saying, let's say that you were, I say you're required to do a research participation and you fit the inclusion criteria. The inclusion criteria says that you're able to do it, but what to be part of that research, you have to have a blood draw 3 times a week for a month. Now, that sounds pretty crazy when you think this is just a little. All I want to do is just get credit for taking psychology, but I feel like I have to do this or else I'm not going to get my grade. That's that's a horrible, scary situation. We have to kind of, I want to make certain you don't get into that type of position. So I had a question. Did it pass?
Yeah, I wanted to mention like I'm I'm assuming that there's like certain students that would like that's still like a very invasive like practice, but like perhaps there's like certain students that would rather do that than like sit there and study to pass the class. I mean, I guess it depends on like what type of grade you get
Right.
in exchange for like getting your blood drawn 3 times a week, but like I guess it just depends. Like there's so many different like external factors that would play into that.
And I agree completely with you on that. I just want to make certain I don't make a type 1 error of you guys, and it's a statistical thinking thing. I don't want you to feel like you're in that type of position where you have to do something like that. I want to let you know that you have control here because I want there to be ethical data that's collected for anybody. And I still want you to see what type of studies are out there to be part of it. So that's one of the reasons why we require participations like this. But yeah, it can feel forced. Now, before I jump a lot further, I'd love to open the discussion. What about being paid to be part of a research study? What do you guys think of that? So, yeah, if I'm paying $20 for you to participate in my study, what's going to happen with that?
That is pure biasm. That is at that point, I think it's just flawed. It's of course there are people that would take it seriously. But I think when money is involved, it motivates people to be dishonest, to be rushed. I think when money's involved, money's a very sensitive topic
Mm-hmm.
day and age. So when a sensitive topic is involved, any kind of sensitive topic, it can add a degree of biasm that's kind of obvious.
I totally agree. I frequently pay my research participants, but there are issues. Allie, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm working,
Uh,
man.
I appreciate it. Um, I agree 100%. And it may give you an incentive to be a part of the research, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be actually interested in the research. You're going to be like, oh, I'll just fill out whatever, $20, you know?
Uh-huh. And that's a problem that we tend to have when we at MTurk, I won't even use them as a panel anymore because I've got a bunch of people with that they'll open up 20 accounts doing that, and then they will all just fill out each one of those, take their $20 a piece. Well, great. Now I've spent $400 for those responses, and they're garbage because they're just filling them out. So you almost have to be careful with who you're collecting from, and it's an ethical thing. I mentioned to you guys about prolific. Did I mention about prolific as a possibility?
I can't recall.
Okay,
No.
so prolific is it is a data panel where you can become as a research participant on this and get paid for studies. Some people actually will make pretty decent money doing this, especially if you're in one of the demographics that kind of a lot of people are specifically looking for on this. But you're required a bare minimum of $16 an hour for any of the studies you're doing. Most of the time, people will pay more on this, but it's something worth looking into being part of if you'd like to get paid and get a little extra money. Yeah, and sometimes there's a waiting list. It just depends on what they're needing, but it's worth looking into if you want to make a little extra cash. Tal, what do you got?
How can you subscribe?
You go to Prolific and then getting started.
So other than, I mean, again, silly question. Other than volunteering and money, what are other ways that pe people conducting these tests kind of try to collect as many people as possible to do these tests? Other than money and volunteer work, is there anything other way to entice someone to come in and fill out this test or be part of the study?
You used a very interesting word there, entice. And I'm not pointing at you and saying that's wrong. That was a wonderful word to use with this. We've got to be very, very, very careful with enticing on that because it skews the data. Um, some things that you can do is just capture natural data that's out in the world that's using naturalistic methods. Um, so stuff like that would be good, but most of the time it is a volunteer perspective. Some people will just be very, very nice and participate in the study. Yes, prolific would definitely count for any of these things, and like I said, it could be a good way to make a little extra money. Um, I've thought about becoming a participant on that myself. I wonder how much I would skew data looking at the studies now because I probably would be questioning what are they actually looking for. But that's kind of where I am in my own world. So I think I would impose bias by being part of a lot of people's studies. So yeah, it's just interesting from this. But yeah, prolific is a great one to look at. I'm gonna jump back in here. Yeah, there are some limitations that we have with doing any type of studies. So what can you guys think about some limitations that we have about doing some experiments on people? So you got an old man here watching this. Um,
I would say like details, like age, gender, like trying to collect as many people as possible into the study. Because
mhm.
I heard that a study isn't just anyone with a pulse. It has to be a certain gender or a certain, I don't know, ethnicity, certain background, stuff like that. And depending on where you are, you might not be able to get hold of that many people. I would assume that is something that might be an issue.
And you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I mean, is it realistic to really capture some of those people on this? Does it really connect to what we're really studying, or are we just gathering data to be able to publish something? So it's a lot of noise that we can sometimes create if we don't ethically look at what we're trying to do. I'm gonna actually go a little bit into some of the ethics that we have to actually go through as researchers. So have you guys ever heard of Institutional Review Board, IRB? Cool. IRB is standard at any university that you're looking at. Some companies also have an institutional review board. You can also do an external review board if you do not have an affiliation with the university. Before conducting any type of study on human subjects or even animals, we have to actually submit what type of research we're going to be doing. And the IRB says, this is appropriate, this is ethical, this is non-ethical. Now, last class, somebody asked, well, are you going to go to jail if you don't get this? Well, no, but most journals will actually ask for your IRB approval number for any study that you do. They want to see that you actually conducted with your protocol, you had a proper informed consent, you made certain that there was not a massive amount of risk to any of the participants. And if there was risks, that the benefit of it outweighs the potential risk that we're giving to people. So there are things where we're not looking at actual human subjects. I have an example of one of my studies here where I did not need to have IRB approval, and it was that working mom study that I had where I studied Reddit. I didn't have to actually go through IRB on this, and I think there's even yeah, the institutional review board was queried prior to data collection, and the board approval, no board approval was required. That was actually required for me to be able to have this sent in. I had to send them specifically the letter from the IRB saying that this was not required. So that is something that they are watching every bit of the type of research that we're doing, so we don't do horrible things. So does anybody have any ideas of some horrible things that people have done with psychological research?
So before we get to that, I have a question.
Sure, bring it.
Um, I don't know why I'm bringing this up. Some time ago, there was a show called Adam Ruins Everything.
Okay.
And it was complete bias. It wasn't like an actual, but it was a show where he would bring up things. I can't even give an example, but one thing he brought up, and till this day, even though I know he had biased opinions, I think about it. Till this day, he says that studies, the reason why there's so many different studies is because there's a rush on handing it in.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a rush on handing it in that they don't really have time to be accurate with the study. They're like, okay, we got a deadline in December. Whatever you got, just send it to them. And they take it at face value. So,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, my first question is that accurate? Is that a real thing that has happened?
Oh, absolutely. It's a real thing.
The
Um,
second and the second question is this the IRB the way they get around that so that they have less situations like that as possible?
I'll answer the second one to start with. The IRB is there to make certain we're not doing things like the Stanford prison experiment or the Tuskegee syphilis experiments that were out there. Um, we want to make certain that we're not actually causing people harm without trying it. There was a study that went through IRB at a university that I'm physically close to. It was a psychologist that was testing people's blood pressures. He specifically said in his IRB protocol that he was going to be testing people's blood pressures and then asking questions about their level of arousal. Now, arousal could mean almost anything. It doesn't mean sexual arousal. It means just basically um, engagement type of thing. It could just mean that. One of the things that he started doing was he was actually taking blood pressure on men's penises. Now, of course, that was horrible, and that was an adverse event that totally is just crazy, but it's something that should not have happened, and we need to be able to make certain we have parameters to do that. The IRB jumped all over him for that, and the guy ended up losing tenure, losing his job. So, and it's still a story that Indiana State University, their psychology department, their IRB is actually almost to the point of militant and unreasonable to work with because they had circumstances like that and they don't want to make an error that will cause people problems.
So could we say that so back to my first question is, could we say that that also would be an issue when it comes to these studies?
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Now,
so sorry. So
no, you're
it's
good.
the reason I'm thinking about it is because I have another class that we're debunking. The class is teaching us how to find good information.
Mhm.
Right now the subject is how to tell if information is something that you can trust or can't trust.
Mhm.
Um, if a good source puts out information that is rushed, how is there a way to kind of tell if that information is flawed or not?
You could look at the author's publications and to see if they're publishing an awful lot of things during that time frame without using a lot of co-authors. Co-authors is another way to be able to expand and get a bunch more publications out. But yeah, we live in a world of publish or perish. In order to get tenure, most places require 10 to 20 publications and high-end journals, impactful journals to even get those things out. So we have to publish. Now, is it quality publication? Most of the time, not. But yeah, really, you hit the nail on the head. With that said, if something has IRB approval, it actually does kind of raise at least the trustworthiness of it because at least somebody looked at the protocol that they went into it a little bit more. More often than not, most studies will be exempt, meaning that, great, it's not really minimal risk. Somebody's going to do a survey. They may get bored doing the study. It's nothing really scary. You're not looking at groups of people that potentially could be harmed. So, and can you think of like some of those at-risk populations? Can anybody mention some of those? At-risk populations that might be children are a perfect
I'd say
example.
children.
Yeah. Prisoners are another one. Yeah, Mohammed.
Yeah, like greedy children. When I was like younger, they used to like offer these gift cards online if you
Mm-hmm.
like filled out the surveys, and I had no care for the surveys at all. I would just like fill them out as fast as possible and redeem my gift card. But I feel like that's like really flawed way of sampling.
It is flawed sampling, and
Yeah.
that goes down to that financial
Right.
manipulation. But I'm thinking about like potential harm by asking people some of these questions. Because I mean, think about it. It's a power thing. Believe it or not, students are actually a protected class as well. We can't just sample to you guys without going through the IRB and making certain that we're not impressing more of that power on you because they know where we kind of almost have you trapped in some ways. So it sometimes has to have more benefit than the risk that we're dealing with. I've been through a full board review once, and I would rather have kidney stones than do it again. I was studying job crafting behaviors in prisoners, and I will tell you, I almost felt like, I mean, I had to get security clearances and a whole bunch of like, they went through every single question that we were possibly going to ask, every single survey. They were giving us problems about forced responses, asking about anything. They fought about things associated with their drug use and such. Um, because the fact of the matter is, it could actually trigger them to be back in that position, and they're trapped. I mean, this is something that they don't really have a way out of those circumstances. So we can do some more expedited thing like a blood draw. That's something that is totally within the psychology realm. I mean, especially if you're looking at hormones. Of course, we need to make certain that there are parameters. If for some reason somebody gets what is it called? Compartmental syndrome. If for some reason you draw the blood up inappropriately and you mess that up and things like that too, you have to have a protocol to be able to manage through that. There's a whole bunch of different things with that too. But even asking questions of people can cause harm. Now, can you maybe give an example of possibly a group that if I ask this question to them, it might cause them harm,
People with PTSD.
right? There's another one about addicts. Imagine I have a circumstance where I am dealing with domestic violence people, people that have experienced domestic violence, especially sexual violence. And I start asking them about smells of their attacker. You think that would be something that would likely not send somebody triggering into a horrible response?
I think, can you hear me first of all?
Now, could there be a benefit of doing a study like that? I could argue there could be if it was done very, 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 very appropriately, and we also had ways for them to be able to vent about that experience afterwards, meaning we're giving psychological counseling after dealing with this. But it does take a very delicate touch. I'm not saying that we should do studies like that, but that's one of the reasons why we have the IRB to go through this. Now, some of the ones that when we think about the full board reviews, drug tests, meaning like we're testing new drugs, tend to fit the more full board review because people are going to get massive side effects. Death could be included in that. And there are benefits of putting out a new blood pressure medication. There's absolutely wonderful benefits of that. But people could die from taking that. So we have to be very careful with the protocols and how do we deal with it? And that's why we have the IRB. Now, IRBs can be a nightmare at different universities. Almost any study that you do will have to have some type of institutional review board. If any of you are going to actually do any studies that are going to be published, you need to have an IRB approval. And normally, until you get to the doctorate level, they want to have a primary investigator being a professor that's gone through certain types of training and things like that too. So that's one of the reasons why they have you as the research assistant to it. It doesn't mean you can't be first author on the paper. It just means that they're the one responsible for the ethical representation of that study. At Brooklyn College, me as an adjunct, if I wanted to conduct research that I solely run through Brooklyn, I actually have to get approval through the chancellor to do the study. So it's a bit of a pain in the butt, to be honest, to do this. But your standard faculty, they just send in a form. It takes about a week to a month, depending on if it's something that's exempt or expedited. Full board, normally, the board meets normally once a month, once every other month. And it involves other professors that deal with this, and they really look at the ethics of it. And boy, do they go into great detail when it's a full board review. You almost feel like you're on trial when you go in front of a full board about it. Because they take the perspective of saying, you're going to kill somebody or you're going to cause them massive harm. You have to prove to us that you're not going to, which again, like I mentioned, we don't really have proof in psychology. We have to give them enough evidence to be able to support saying, look, we're going to do more benefit and we have safety parameters in place. Did you guys know that IRB existed? And what are your thoughts on something like this? Is it good that we have a review board? Yeah, it is limiting. It might be worth at some point if you ever talk to another one of your psych professors or people that do research on human beings, just ask them what their views on IRB are. They will have very polarized perspectives. They'll either say, "Oh yeah, it's something we have to do," or they will call them the worst people that have ever walked this planet because they get limitations on what they're allowed to do. I had a study of mine tanked completely at Indiana State University because they were saying that I was causing more risk to people because I was asking about their intention within the next 6 months that they were going to quit their job. And they were saying specifically that that was going to be something that would make them want to quit their job. Again, too far. absolutely too far, in my opinion. I also backed it up with a bunch of other studies showing this is the standard, and I was able to pass it through, showing that the risk was lower because of other places that had passed it through. But because of that, I missed my window to be able to sample the people that I wanted to sample because they said that I could only do the survey between this 1 month time frame. So IRB can be a very big pain in the ever loving butt. So yeah, it's just something that to let you know, all of our studies have to go through stuff like this. Let's get back on here. Come on. There we go. We need to have internal validity. Those things are kind of with quantitative measures. I mentioned that. Did you guys come across diary studies at all? So this is a newer thing. We've been doing this for about 20, 30 years, and we used to give people little books that they would take home and they would fill out at certain times about saying, okay, so at the end of the day, how do you feel about this? Or if you have such and such experience, write it down. And then we would sample them multiple times to get their experience throughout the day. So it's not just an aggregate perspective, they're getting more perspectives on what's actually happening. So an example of something like that, that in the medicine realm, if you were checking your cortisol levels, so your stress levels, they normally will have you spit in a tube multiple times a day at different times. And they, based off of then the segmentation inside the tube that you get, they'll say what your stress levels are throughout the day. And they test it through multiple days on this as well too. But you can see a dip in certain times of the day where you'll get your need to get coffee at like 3 p.m. and such. So that type of research exists in diaries. You can also, because everybody has a smartphone now, basically give them a quick prompt through a text message or something like that to say, how are you feeling right now? Or if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, rate your level of symptoms 1 to 10 right now. And what symptom are you having? So you can get a whole bunch of information from an individual and then do 100, 200 of those people. You've got a bunch of aggregate information that you're able to then look at saying, what changes happen during the day? It's very, very, very math intensive, but it is a research method that is becoming a lot more popular. Why do you think it's more popular than just sampling one time with an experiment or something like that? Why would this be a more preferred method in some context?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, I said that I was trying to say that people with like schizophrenia and like medical causes can
Mm-hmm.
evolve and change over time, and like in their diary it can change rather than opposed to doing just one experiment. So yeah, that's why.
Yeah. We get to see
I'm
change. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
It's not an experiment, but I'm sort of dealing with this right now. I broke my leg in October and I'm doing PT right now.
Yep.
And so my the place I go every like few sessions, they have me fill out this survey that asks me about my pain and my ability to do things. And
Mm-hmm.
it really just depends. It not the first thing I noticed, because I considered going into sort of like IU and IX design, which
Mm-hmm.
involves like how you ask survey questions and how that influences it. So the first thing I noticed is like depending on how it's asking me about my pain, it changes my opinion of my pain. So that was like something I noticed. But also it's it's interesting because they're doing it over a span of time. So it's seeing like a gradual change, whereas the day to day, if you just ask me once at the beginning and the end, might not show you as much detail. But if you're seeing like the slow changes to my answers over week after week at different times of the day, you're getting a more comprehensive, like, understanding of where I am at personally. But that's only relative to me because I also have a really high tolerance for pain. So sometimes I don't know how to answer because I'm also thinking like, what are they looking for? Because technically I can handle it, what probably would be a 10 out of 10 in pain for other people. But I know that they're asking me if my pain is at its max. So it's just like, it's confusing. But yeah, I feel like I'm seeing like more an understanding of how I'm dealing with it on a day-to-day basis because of how often they're asking me.
I love that you mentioned PT because especially in the physical medicine realm, we use this every single day. Every single patient that walks into my office, I have them do a functional rating index as well as specifically to any extremity or other things like that too to find out what functionally is their deficit. Well, the great thing is that when we resample that again, we can say how much has changed with this. And I've actually won some court cases about saying specifically, we changed the patient's condition by 30%. Well, great. So that showed the efficacy of our treatment because we were able to show this is what they started with, this is what changed. Our treatment was effective with that. So, and that was a motor vehicle accident that we were dealing with. But it's very, very common in medicine to do that. Even if you're doing like sleep studies and things like that too, we do a lot of diary studies in that perspective. So thank you for bringing up the PT thing. It's a perfect example. I did a diary study. If you look at, I'm just giving an example if you want to see one. My dissertation was actually a diary study, and I'm not going to pull it up because it's a ridiculously long paper. But with a little help from home, the impact of romantic partner support, I actually sampled people morning and afternoon with the recovery they had overnight with their spouse giving them some type of support. So there's different ways to sample these type of things, but I was seeing how much burnout changed for them based off of the type of support they were getting after somebody had treated them uncivilly. So just an example of that, if you were interested, currently working that up to get published. Reading this too. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great field to go into. If that's something that you're interested in, man, jump on it. So I think that that was basically the big thing as well too. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can study this. I'm not gonna. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can look at too. All of these can be an example of anxiety that we could have for an outcome perspective on this. Well, great. So a person's sweating a lot more associated with their anxiety. That's a way that we could study it and narrow it down to a certain group of people. Again, any of these things could be used as an outcome assessment tool, and I guarantee you those validated tools already exist out there. So just throwing out, there's lots of stuff with that. Oh, I wanted to share one more thing. I apologize. For next week, and I'm gonna put this because from what I understand, we do not have class on Wednesday. Am I right?
Yes,
We do not, correct?
we do not.
Okay. I'm just making certain because it's about the clarity. What I'm asking you guys to do, and I will post this on here too, pretty much we're going to start with the brain next week. Read the chapter, and I'll post this as well too. There's also a simple crash course video that I recommend watching, but we're going to go into, it's almost going to feel like an anatomy and physiology class where we're going to talk about, well, what is the pons? What is the amygdala? What is the prefrontal cortex? What's the occipital region? Things like that, and how those actually affect our perception. The reason why we're starting with the brain before starting to go into the history of mental health and issues with mental health is we almost want to have like a standard of what is textbook normal before we start talking about the abnormal side of it. I am going to get you an updated syllabus It is not updated, but it's going to start actually being a little bit more formulaic now because we kind of covered the general perspectives of the science of psychology. Now, people asked some questions. What were they said? Yeah, we don't. Wow, it goes so quick. Cool. Any other questions? Everybody happy? Was this interesting? Did you get new information? I absolutely, you guys will have access to the Zoom recordings.
Definitely
I've
interesting.
been posting them, all of them. I'm sorry, Ellie. Allie,
Sorry, I had a connection thing. I didn't mean to talk over you. I said it's definitely interesting.
you can talk
Um,
over me any day, man. We're good. By the way, the statement of man has nothing to do with gender. It's the jazz performer of me. So
Yeah,
I
that's
always
a
want to
perfectly
clarify
good.
that.
No, I
So
feel like I can read the intention, so I didn't feel any malice. So
always throw that out. I almost wish everybody would put their pronouns uh, as part of their signature, just because I don't want to mispronounce somebody. So, and probably next week, especially Tuesday, you guys will be seeing cats.
excellent news.
Cool. Well, you guys have a fantastic day. I'm gonna stop the recording.